Hi. In the psychological world, there's a lot of talk about self-regulation and how do we best do that, and the three brains and their involvement. And I recognize that sometimes as a psychologist, I don't always do a great job of explaining how or what all of these things are. And so that's what this video is about today. It is to discuss the five senses and the three brains and how does it all work together in our ability to regulate ourselves and our emotions. Hi, I'm Kim Long. I'm with Docha Psychological Services in Spruce Grove, Alberta. And as always, these videos are just meant to be educational purposes. They don't constitute a therapeutic relationship. I always invite you to visit your therapist or look into anything I say to verify what I'm saying. So it's just meant to help you out. Okay, so where to start? First, let's start with what is self-regulation. Self-regulation kind of comes from this idea of the window of tolerance. And you can think of the window of tolerance as our sweet spot. It's where our thinking brain, so that's one of the three brains, our thinking brain is able to still stay online, if you think of a computer analogy, in order to tell the rest of our system to calm down. And what it does is it allows us to stay present in the moment and not become overwhelmed and sink into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is the goal, because then we're able to stay present in our lives and remain fully functioning. Now, is that always possible? No. As a psychologist, I do want clients to process their emotions and deal with their feelings or their body sensations without telling them to go away or shut down, which is sometimes how self-regulation appears. But self-regulation can be really important when you're in difficult situations in order to survive them and make the best decisions that you can in that time. So let's talk briefly about the three brains. I know of the three brains from Dan Siegel. He is a neuropsychologist, I think. And he has the hand model of the brain. So if you take your hand, this is the spinal cord. The palm of your hand is the reptilian brain. It's the oldest part of the brain. It is responsible for survival. I call it the body brain, just because that's it's those instinctive responses. You fold your thumb over, and this is the emotion brain. It's where the amygdala is, which we're going to talk about. The amygdala is really the emotion center of the brain. It's also involved in memory. Now, your fingers, if you fold them over, see how it makes kind of a small brain? If you fold them over, this is the youngest part of the brain, and it's responsible for making story, language. It's the logic, thinking, self-regulation part of the brain. Now, these two are twinsies, the emotion and the body brain. They don't have language, and they respond to what's going on in your environment to warn the thinking brain, hey, we might have to act. Now, sometimes what happens is that these get really strongly triggered, or you end up with a bunch of chemical responses all in a row, and it overwhelms the thinking brain. The thinking brain flips off, and that's when you kind of shut down or lash out, or you do things that afterwards you go, oops. And that's because your thinking brain wasn't online. It's also why you sometimes can't remember what happened during a trauma, because this was offline, and this is really important. This frontal lobe is really important in being able to remember things, and the hippocampus is involved in that, transfer of memory, all of that, which we're also going to mention today. So that's a lot of information already, I know. Basically, the way I practice is I believe that the mind, the body, and the emotion brains need to be working in harmony in order to be healthy and be able to make healthy decisions. As part of that, self-regulation helps to keep the thinking brain online, and that's why it can be important in certain circumstances. All right, so now, as I mentioned before, what's this stuff about the five senses? Well, these two brains are always scanning our environment. They're taking in all sorts of information. And so the five senses are really crucial in processing and learning and interpretation of our environment, because they give us information about what's safe, what's not safe. And what we feel is, so that emotion brain is heavily influenced by what we are perceiving in the environment. So our emotional responses are really guided by our senses. So for example, for me, if I smell liver, I'm instantly like, grossed out, want nothing to do with it. But my mom used to love liver, so she would smell it and she'd have all these memories of down home cooking and being with her mom. So it triggers positive or negative responses based on just that one sense and our memories that were connected with that. Needless to say, I didn't have great memories of liver, so we don't need to get into that. That's not the purpose of the video. But you could also think about when we hear the sound of a fire alarm. Instinctive response. We either need to run or attend to something. Another one for me is when you feel it's almost like a light tickle on your leg. I instantly think a bug is crawling on me because that happened to me as a kid. So that kind of sensation is not paired with a positive response for me, but I do prefer touch as a sense in order for something to calm me down. So let's talk about some other ones. Music, for example. When music plays, especially if it's music that we like, those vibrations trigger the brain and the body to release dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good chemical. So it kind of gives us a high, it makes our body just feel lighter or whatever, so that we feel good. And with sound, so we're talking about the sound sense now, sound is always on alert, which is why our alarm clocks usually work in the morning, unless you're certain people who love to snooze. But even then, you usually respond to them and shut them off several times, which we won't get into. So sound is a really important sense for determining danger. And because it responds so quickly, music can be a wonderful resource for self-regulation because it releases that dopamine. If you think about sight, sight is really important in mood. If we're sad, it colors our world differently. We really think of the sight sense as a color usually. So when we're sad, we talk about, like you think of those metaphors, we talk about the world being gray. Whereas when you're happy, the world is vibrant and full of color. So sight is really connected with mood. So for some people, sight can be their strongest sense. And like if I see a daffodil, it makes me happy. That color yellow, it just brightens things up. I can't think of a color that I don't really like. But I invite you to think of those things. Taste. Taste is interesting. We talk about this too. We'll say, oh, you're just bitter, to mean that you're jealous or upset about something. Some scientists, I don't know why they pick these studies, but they're fascinating. Some scientists have found that jealousy and sadness are linked with bitter and sour tastes, whereas love and contentment are linked with sweet tastes, which again, there's an analogy that they're sweet on you, meaning that they love you. So we have these analogies that we just subconsciously know that our senses are involved in how we feel about things. If we move to smell, anyone who has a dog and has to clean up after said dog understands smell. But smell is closely linked with the amygdala and the hippocampus. So what happens is the amygdala is our emotional center, and sensations pass through the amygdala, and they also connect with the hippocampus. And from that, we make memory. And so when we have a memory, there's also all this sensory input that is part of the memory. So when we trigger the sensation, we can trigger positive memories, which makes our body feel good. So the amygdala and the hippocampus are responsible for emotion and memory, and they are directly linked with the limbic system, which is involved in being able to tell ourselves to, fight, flight, freeze, tell ourselves to calm down or whatever. So smell again can really trigger memory. Lilacs, the smell of lilacs just makes me happy. It makes me remember when I was a kid. And there's a whole story about the lilac bush, but we won't get into that either. And then touch. Touch is our automatic body response. It's our first way of communicating. If you think of our parents holding us or whatever when we're kids, we learn if touch is safe, it can be a really positive resource when you're trying to soothe yourself. So being able to hug yourself, bear hug, or like girls who play with their hair, that's a touch response. You're trying to soothe yourself in some way. So what I would invite you to do, honestly, is think about your 5 senses. Think about when you have a happy memory, what is the first sense that you remember as part of that? And that might be your strongest sense, so that when you go to calm yourself emotionally, when you're trying to soothe the emotion brain, you want to use emotion strategies. So those are the 5 senses. If your strongest sense is smell, for example, you are going to turn to things that smell good, not things that smell bad. That works against what we're trying to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Now, for those of you who may be stuck on this, I invite you to actually download the Dochis Life Jacket app. In there, we have a section where we ask you, what is your strongest sense? And if you're able to pick, and sometimes you're guessing, and that's okay, just recognize what you need in the moment. You pick the sense, and then it'll come up with some strategies that are related to that sense, or it's supposed to. So let me know if there's any issues with that. And it's found on the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. So feel free to check that out too, and just try it out. Play with it. In the meantime, I hope that I know it's a lot of information. I do hope that it helps you, though, figure out ways to soothe yourself when you're really, really struggling and you believe that you need to stay online. Help that emotion brain out. It ends up helping your body brain and your thinking brain, which, like I said, they all work together. So in the meantime, experiment. See what you like and what you don't like. And in the meantime, please take care of yourself. And as always, if you have any questions, just reach out. Okay? Bye for now.